My name is Nain Sky. I'm 32 years old, and I never thought I'd be abandoned at a five-star restaurant on my birthday. When my husband James called me a disgrace in front of 20 wealthy people and left me with a $5,000 bill, something inside me finally broke. The tears welled up but didn't fall as I stared at the check, a strange calm washing over me. What James didn't realize was that this humiliation would be his biggest mistake. Before I tell you what happened next, drop a comment letting me know where you're watching from. And don't forget to subscribe to see how I turned this humiliation into my greatest victory. I met James at a school charity auction in Boston 3 years ago. I was a third-grade teacher at Lakeside Elementary, organizing the event to fund new playground equipment. James attended as a representative of his investment firm, which was making a corporate donation. He stood out immediately in his perfectly tailored navy suit among the casual attire of most parents and teachers. When he bid $10,000 for a children's art piece my class had created, the room erupted in applause. After the auction, he approached me with a warm smile that reached his deep blue eyes. At 38, he exuded confidence without arrogance, and when he asked about the children who made the artwork, I was touched by his genuine interest. "The kids will be thrilled their painting raised so much money," I said, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear nervously. "The real value is in your dedication to them," he replied. "I'm James Alexander, by the way. Our worlds couldn't have been more different. I grew up in a middle-class family in a small town outside Boston, worked through college, and chose teaching for the fulfillment rather than the salary. James was born into wealth, educated at prestigious private schools, and had expanded his family's already substantial fortune through shrewd investments. Our first date was at Asmal Italian restaurant, where he seemed charmed by my stories about my students. "You're so refreshingly real," he said, reaching for my hand across the table. "Most people in my circles are only interested in what others can do for them." The romance moved quickly after that. He surprised me with weekend getaways to coastal towns, sent flowers to my classroom, and listened attentively when I spoke about my passion for education. I was swept away by his attention and the intensity of his feelings. "You're different from anyone I've ever met," he would say, kissing my forehead. "You care about making a difference, not just making money." 8 months after we met, James proposed during a private dinner on a yacht in Boston Harbor. The ring was bigger than anything I would have chosen for myself. But his speech was heartfelt. "You've shown me what truly matters in life, Oilia. Your kindness and passion make me want to be better. Will you marry me?" My hand trembled as he slipped the ring on my finger. I said yes through happy tears, ignoring the small voice in my head, questioning if this was all too fast. The wedding was smaller than I expected, given James's resources and connections. He explained that he wanted something intimate, but I later learned his family had concerns about our match. His mother, Catherine, attended with a polite smile that never warmed, and his father, Robert, seemed to be evaluating me throughout the reception. The first signs of trouble came subtly appearing, so gradually I almost didn't notice. 2 months into our marriage, James commented on my outfit before a dinner with colleagues. "Maybe wear the blue dress I bought you instead of that one," he suggested, eyeing my favorite floral dress with slight disapproval. "It's more sophisticated." I changed without argument, wanting to make a good impression. At the dinner, he corrected my table etiquette with gentle touches and whispered instructions. I laughed it off at the time, thinking he was being helpful. More suggestions followed. He hired a stylist to elevate my wardrobe. He winced slightly when he used certain expressions from my hometown. He interrupted me when I talked about teaching at social gatherings. "Oilia has such a big heart," he would say, redirecting the conversation before I could elaborate on my work. I began monitoring my speech appearance and behavior to avoid his subtle corrections. Without realizing it, I was molding myself to fit into his world, losing pieces of myself in the process. My best friends Sarah and Maya noticed the changes during our increasingly rare get-togethers. "You seem different," Sarah said during a coffee date 6 months into my marriage. "You hardly talk about your kids at school anymore." "James thinks it's not interesting for most people," I explained immediately, feeling defensive. Maya's eyes narrowed. "Since when do you care what's interesting to random rich people? Those students are your passion." I brushed off their concerns, convinced they just didn't understand the adjustments required in a relationship where two different worlds collided. I believed that James loved the real me, and that our connection transcended our different backgrounds. Love conquers all, I told them with a smile that felt forced, even to me. James appreciates that I'm not like the women he usually meets. He values my authenticity. What I didn't admit was that I was already losing that authenticity piece by piece, day by day. Each time I changed my behavior to please him, each time I swallowed my thoughts rather than express them, I was fading. But I was too deeply in love, too committed to our marriage to acknowledge what was happening. I wanted to believe in our fairy tale, the school teacher and the wealthy businessman bridging their different worlds through love. I ignored the warning signs because the alternative was too painful to consider. Maybe if I had listened to my friends, things would have turned out differently. But then again, perhaps I needed to learn this lesson the hard way. 18 months into our marriage, James received a significant promotion that made him one of the youngest partners at his firm. Our life shifted again. We moved from our comfortable downtown apartment to a sprawling 5-bedroom colonial in Brooklyn, complete with manicured gardens and a 3-car garage. The house felt cavernous to me, its perfect interiors, more like a museum than a home. Each morning, I would wander through empty rooms after James left for work, exchanging awkward smiles with Maria, the housekeeper, who came 3 times a week. I missed the cheerful chaos of my classroom, the finger paintings on the walls, the stories written in wobbly handwriting. Instead, I was surrounded by expensive art chosen by an interior designer James had hired. "What should I do today?" asked Maria, once genuinely lost. "Mrs. Alexander, perhaps you could join one of the ladies' committees. Many wives in this neighborhood volunteer for charities," she suggested kindly. I tried following her advice, joining a hospital fundraising group, but the other women treated me with polite distance, clearly aware I wasn't from their social circle. Their conversations revolved around vacation homes, private club memberships, and their children's progress at elite schools. When I mentioned teaching at a public school, their interest evaporated. As James's career demanded more of his time, he compensated by including me in business dinners and social events with colleagues. These occasions became a special kind of torture. I would spend hours preparing, choosing appropriate outfits from my newly curated wardrobe, practicing small talk about topics I had researched. At these gatherings, James would introduce me briefly before becoming absorbed in business discussions. I'd stand at the periphery of conversations, smiling until my face hurt, nodding at jokes I didn't understand about people I didn't know. When I did try to engage, James would often interject. "Oilia is still learning about the industry," he'd say with an indulgent smile, patting my hand before steering the conversation elsewhere. Increasingly, these dinners and parties moved to our home. James would invite colleagues, clients, and business associates without consulting me, then expect me to manage all the details. Make sure everything is perfect. He'd instruct straightening my necklace or adjusting my hair. These people are important to our future. Our future. I started to wonder what that actually meant. My own career had been effectively sidelined after James suggested I take a break from teaching. "You don't need to work anymore," he had said. "It's not like we need the money, And honestly, being a public school teacher doesn't really align with our position now. I agreed reluctantly, promising myself it would be temporary. To maintain some connection to education, I began tutoring online a few hours each week, carefully scheduling sessions when James was at work. I opened a separate bank account for this income, a small act of independence that gave me surprising comfort. The financial control tightened gradually. First, James suggested combining our accounts for simplicity. Then, he offered to handle all the bills and investments, since that's my expertise. Before long, I found myself asking for money for personal purchases. "Do you really need another pair of jeans?" He would question, though he thought nothing of spending thousands on a watch. "Can you justify this expense for books?" He would ask while freely ordering rare wines for his collection. Each request made me feel smaller, more dependent. I began saving some of my tutoring money, rather than depositing it all, creating a hidden emergency fund without fully acknowledging why I felt the need for such a precaution. My world continued to shrink as James's expanded. Old friends stopped calling after too many canceled plans. My parents' calls went unreturned, because they always seemed to come when James and I were busy. Even my former principal's offer to return to teaching was declined with the excuse that my life had moved in a different direction. One rainy afternoon, alone in the house, while James attended a conference, I discovered a text thread between him and his mother that had synchronized to our shared tablet. "Is Oilia adjusting better to your lifestyle?" his mother had asked. "She's trying," James replied. "Still rough around the edges, but I'm working on it. You know, your father and I always thought you made a mistake. Someone from your background should have chosen more carefully." "I know, Mother. Sometimes I wonder if you were right." I stared at those words until they blurred a hollow feeling expanding in my chest. Was it just a project to him? A charity case he had rescued from an ordinary life? A mistake he was trying to correct rather than a partner he cherished? That night I tried to reconnect with the man I had fallen in love with. I cooked his favorite meal, wore the dress he had first complimented me in, and attempted to discuss our relationship. "I feel like we're drifting apart," I said as we sat at the dining table. "That's ridiculous," he dismissed without looking up from his phone. "We've never been more successful." "I'm not talking about success. I'm talking about us, about happiness." He finally looked at me, irritation flashing across his face. "This is what adult relationships look like, Oilia. The honeymoon phase doesn't last forever. We have responsibilities, a position to maintain." I tried again a week later, suggesting we take a weekend away, just the two of us. He agreed half-heartedly, but canned at the last minute for an unmissable opportunity with a potential client. My birthday was approaching, and I decided to make one last effort to salvage what was left of our relationship. I would plan a special evening, create a space for honest conversation, and try to rediscover the connection that had once seemed so powerful. "Can we have dinner just the two of us for my birthday?" I asked James one morning as he rushed to leave for work. He paused at the door, briefcase in hand, and smiled the warm smile I had seen so rarely lately. "Of course I'll make reservations at Lumiere, just the two of us." That promise and the glimpse of the old James gave me hope. Maybe we could find our way back to each other after all. I held into that hope, not knowing it was about to be shattered in the most public and humiliating way possible. My 32nd birthday began with unexpected promise. I woke to find James sitting on the edge of our bed, a small blue box in his hand, and a cup of coffee on the nightstand. "Happy birthday, beautiful," he said, leaning down to kiss my forehead. He hadn't called me beautiful in months. The box contained a platinum bracelet studded with sapphires. "To match your eyes," he explained, fastening it around my wrist. His fingers lingered on my skin, and for a moment I glimpsed the man I had married. I've made reservations at Lumiere for 8 Wu, he continued. Just the two of us as promised. We're something special. Throughout the day, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in over a year. I treated myself to a spa appointment, getting my hair styled in loose waves and splurging on a professional makeup application. I chose a midnight blue dress I'd been saving for a special occasion, one that James had approved of, but I hadn't had the chance to wear. At 5 Augs, my phone chimed with a text from James. Slight change of plans. Need to include Hamilton and Richard's couples tonight. Business opportunity too good to miss. Car will pick you up at 7 instead of 7:30. My heart sank. The Hamiltons and Richards were major clients. Both couples intimidating in their old money confidence. Still, I told myself it was only 2 couples. We could still find time to connect. By 6, another text arrived. Several more joining. Total party of 20, now moved to private room at Lumiere where the Black Valentino 20 people. My intimate birthday dinner had transformed into a business event. The Black Valentino was the most formal dress I owned, one James had insisted I buy for important occasions. I changed outfits mechanically, the joy of the morning evaporating. The car delivered me to Lumiere, one of Boston's most exclusive restaurants, where James waited in the lobby. He assessed my appearance with a quick glance. Good choice, he nodded, adjusting my necklace slightly. These people represent over $50 million in potential investment. Follow my lead and try to make a good impression. No happy birthday this time. No acknowledgement that this evening was supposed to be about us. The private dining room glittered with crystal and silver. I recognized some faces from previous events, but many were new. James guided me through introductions, his hand pressing firmly against the small of my back, steering me like a prop. This is my wife, Oilia, he would say, before quickly highlighting his connection to each guest. Not once did he mention it was my birthday. I was seated between Mrs. Hamilton, a silver-haired woman with penetrating green eyes, and Mr. Richards, whose attention remained fixed on his phone throughout the appetizer course. Across the table, James charmed everyone with industry anecdotes and carefully timed jokes. Oilia was a teacher before we married, Mrs. Hamilton commented, studying me over her wineglass. Yes, I replied, grateful for the opening. 3rd grade. I loved working with the children at that age. They're so curious and honest. How quaint, she murmured, though I imagine James's world is quite different from finger painting and alphabet songs. Her condescension stung, but I maintained my smile. Every world has its value. Education shapes future generations, including future business leaders. Mrs. Hamilton's eyebrow arched. Indeed, though I sent my children to Westfield Academy precisely to ensure they received proper preparation for their positions in society. The conversation shifted to private schools with various guests comparing the merits of institutions I could never have afforded to attend. I sipped my wine and nodded politely, feeling increasingly invisible. As the main course arrived, James stood to propose a toast to a recent successful venture. Glasses were raised, congratulations exchanged. Not a word about my birthday. I took a larger sip of wine than intended, feeling it warm my face. Mr. Calloway, the oldest guest and apparently the most important based on James's attentiveness, asked about market projections across the table. James launched into an analysis, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used when particularly eager to impress. I reached for my water glass, accidentally knocking over my nearly full wine glass. The red liquid splashed across the white tablecloth and onto Mrs. Richards' cream designer dress. She gasped, jumping to her feet as servers rushed over with napkins. "I'm so sorry," I exclaimed, mortified. "It was an accident." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to our end of the table, including James's. His expression hardened into something I'd never seen before. Cold fury replacing his carefully maintained charm. "For God's sake, Oilia," he hissed. "Can't you do anything right?" Mrs. Richards dabbed at her dress, waving away my apologies. "These things happen," she said stiffly. But James wasn't finished. He stood, throwing his napkin onto the table. "This is exactly what I'm dealing with," he announced to the table, completely out of her depth. "An absolute disgrace." The words hit me like physical blows. I sat frozen, unable to process that my husband was publicly humiliating me on my birthday. "James," I whispered. "Please don't." He ignored me, addressing Mr. Calloway instead. "I apologize for my wife's behavior. Some people simply cannot adapt to certain standards no matter how much guidance they receive." Mr. Calloway looked uncomfortable. "Perhaps we should move on. Accidents happen to everyone." But something had broken loose in James. Perhaps it was the wine or the pressure of impressing these people, or simply that the facade he'd maintained had finally cracked. "No, this is a pattern," he continued, his voice rising. "I've done everything to help her fit in, but you can't turn a public school teacher into someone worthy of this company." Tears burned behind my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. "Not here, not in front of these people." "I think you should leave," I said quietly, reaching for my purse. "Yes, you should," James snapped. "You've done enough damage." I stood on shaky legs, dignity the only thing I had left to preserve. James's final blow came as I reached the door. "A woman like you should be grateful. I even looked your way," he called after me. "Remember that before you embarrass yourself further." 20 pairs of eyes watched as I walked out. In the hallway, I heard chairs scraping, and James announcing they would continue the evening elsewhere. Minutes later, the entire party exited James, leading them toward the restaurant's front door without a backward glance. The manager approached me where I stood in the empty corridor. "Mrs. Alexander, your party has departed," but he hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "They've left without settling the bill." He handed me a leather folder. Inside was the check for $5,372. Every detail itemized the rare wines, premium steaks, exclusive desserts, ordered to impress people who had just watched my marriage implode. I stared at the amount of strange calm replacing the humiliation. In that moment, something crystallized within me. This was not a disaster. This was freedom. I looked up at the manager and did something that surprised even me. I smiled. The bill trembled slightly in my hand as I stared at the staggering total $5,372, enough money to fund a classroom supplies for an entire year, enough to make a significant difference in many lives. Instead, it had been spent on a single evening of pretension and cruelty. Mrs. Alexander. The manager's voice broke through my thoughts. His name tag read Antonio, and his expression held a mixture of concern and embarrassment. "Is there a problem with the bill?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "No problem at all. My husband seems to have forgotten his wallet along with his basic human decency." Antonio's professional mask slipped slightly, revealing a glimpse of sympathy. "Perhaps you'd like to use the office to make a phone call." I nodded gratefully, following him to a small, elegant room tucked away from the main dining area. Once inside, I sank into a leather chair, the reality of my situation washing over me. "Would you like some water?" "Or perhaps something stronger," Antonio offered. "Water would be perfect." "Thank you." When he returned with a crystal glass of ice water, he hesitated at the door. "Mrs. Alexander, I hope I'm not overstepping, but this isn't the first time your husband has dined here." Something in his tone made them look up. "What do you mean?" Antonio closed the door softly and spoke in a lowered voice. "Mr. Alexander is known among our staff for his demanding nature. He's made servers cry, sent back perfectly prepared dishes, and spoken to our team in ways that he paused, choosing his words carefully, in ways that reflect poorly on him, not on our establishment. This new information settled over me like another piece of a puzzle I hadn't known I was solving. The James I thought I knew would never behave that way. But then the James I thought I knew wouldn't have called his wife a disgrace in front of 20 people. "Thank you for telling me," I said quietly. Antonio nodded. "I'll give you privacy for your call." Alone in the office, I pulled out my phone. Instead of calling James, I scrolled to a contact I hadn't used in over a year, Linda Shapiro, the lawyer who had volunteered at our school helping families with legal issues. We had become friends over shared lunches in the teacher's lounge. She answered on the third ring. "Oilia, is everything all right? It's been ages. Linda, I need your help," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "I think my marriage is over and I need to understand my options." Over the next 20 minutes, I gave Linda a condensed version of my situation. She listened without interruption, only asking clarifying questions when needed. When I finished, her response was immediate and clear. "First things first, Oilia, do you have any money that's solely yours? Accounts he can't access." I thought of my secret tutoring fund. "Yes, not much, but some." "Good. That's our starting point." Linda's professional tone was reassuring. "Now I need you to document everything. The financial control, the isolation, tonight's incident." Massachusetts is an equitable distribution state, which means wait. I interrupted a plan forming in my mind, the bill. "I need to pay this bill first. Can you afford $5,000? Linda asked, concern evident in her voice. "No, but we have a joint credit card." I'm still his wife, at least legally. I could almost hear Linda's smile through the phone. "Yes, you are. And make sure you keep the itemized receipt." After ending the call, I took a moment to gather my thoughts. The evening had been a disaster, but it had also been illuminating. For months, I'd been trying to save a marriage that James had already destroyed. Now I needed to save myself. I called Antonio back to the office. "I'd like to pay the bill now," I said, presenting the joint platinum card James insisted I carry for emergencies. As Antonio processed the payment, I made another request. I noticed security cameras in the dining room. Would it be possible to get footage of tonight's incident? Antonio hesitated. That would normally require a court order or police request. "I understand. But if there were to be a legal situation, a divorce for instance, would you be willing to preserve that footage?" He considered my words carefully before nodding. "I believe we keep security recordings for 90 days as a matter of policy, and if a subpoena were to arrive within that time frame, we would certainly comply." "Thank you." I signed the receipt, making sure to request a detailed copy for my records. Before leaving, I asked one more favor. "Could you connect me with any staff who served our table tonight? I'd like to apologize personally for the disruption." Over the next 30 minutes, I spoke with 3 servers and a busboy, all of whom had witnessed James's outburst. I apologized, sincerely thanked them for their service, and casually mentioned how helpful it would be if they remembered details of the evening should they ever be asked. I left generous cash tips from my emergency fund, ensuring they would remember me. The ride home was surreal. The driver James had arranged was still waiting, apparently paid for the entire evening. As we drove through Boston's quiet streets, I made a mental inventory of everything I would need from the house. Important documents, irreplaceable personal items, evidence of James's financial control. Sarah answered her phone immediately despite the late hour. "I need a place to stay tonight," I told her without preamble. "My door is open," she replied without hesitation. "Always. At home." I moved quietly through the dark house gathering essentials, birth certificate, passport, and social security card from the home office, family photos, and the few pieces of jewelry that had belonged to my grandmother from my dresser. My laptop and external hard drive containing years of teaching materials and personal files. In James's office, I photographed financial statements that had been delivered in physical form, careful to leave everything exactly as I found it. I discovered several documents I hadn't known existed, a prenuptial agreement I'd signed during the whirlwind of wedding planning, but hadn't fully understood investment accounts in his name, only in records showing he had borrowed the small inheritance I'd received when my grandfather passed away. Each discovery should have hurt, but instead it strengthened my resolve. I was not just leaving a cruel husband. I was escaping a calculated attempt to erase who I truly was. I packed efficiently, taking only what couldn't be replaced and what would help me rebuild my life. As a final act, I removed my wedding and engagement rings, placing them on James's nightstand with a single note. You're right. I should be grateful. Grateful that I now see clearly. The weight that lifted as Sarah's apartment door closed behind me was almost physical. For the first time in years, I could breathe fully. The pain would come later, I knew. But for now, there was only clarity, and the first steps of a plan that had begun forming the moment James called me a disgrace. You look different, Sarah observed, taking my bag. I feel different, I replied. Like I've woken up from a long, strange dream. Welcome back, she said, pulling me into a hug. I've missed you. That night, I slept more peacefully than I had in months, knowing that the woman who would wake up in the morning would be someone new, someone stronger, wiser, and finally free to reclaim her life. Morning arrived with a cacophony of notifications. My phone displayed 33 missed calls from James, along with a stream of text messages that evolved from angry demands to know where I was, to desperate pleas for forgiveness. You embarrassed me in front of important clients. Where the hell are you? You have no right to just disappear. This is childish behavior. Please come home so I can talk about this. I'm sorry I lost my temper. Oilia, please, I need you. I read each message without responding, watching his progression from rage to bargaining. The final text had arrived just 20 minutes ago. If you don't come home immediately, there will be consequences. Sarah brought coffee and sat beside me on her living room couch. What's your next move? I have an appointment with Linda at 9, I replied, setting the phone aside. She's meeting us at her office downtown. Linda's law office occupied the 10th floor of a sleek building overlooking Boston Common. She greeted me with a warm hug before transforming into the skilled attorney I remembered from her Pruno work at school. Let's establish the facts, she said, opening a notepad. Based on what you've shared, we're dealing with emotional abuse, financial control, and potential misappropriation of your inheritance. For the next 2 hours, we documented everything. The gradual isolation from friends and family, James's increasing control over finances, the public humiliation, and the evidence I'd gathered overnight. The prenup is concerning Linda, admitted reviewing the document I'd photographed. But it was designed primarily to protect his family assets and business interests. What we're pursuing is fair compensation for your contributions to the marriage and the return of your inheritance, which he had no right to touch. Can we win? I asked. Linda's expression was measured. Massachusetts law favors equitable distribution, and with evidence of his behavior, especially the financial control, we've leverage. Plus, she added with a slight smile, men like your husband value their reputation above all else. The threat of having his behavior exposed may motivate a settlement. We drafted a letter requesting mediation rather than immediately filing for divorce. A strategic move, Linda suggested, would appear reasonable while putting James on notice that I was serious. Now about your immediate needs, Linda continued. Do you have somewhere safe to stay? Do you need financial assistance? I have savings from tutoring, I explained. About $11,000 that James doesn't know about, and Sarah's letting me stay with her for now. Good. And your career? Would you want to return to teaching? The question hit me like a revelation. Of course, I wanted to teach again. It wasn't just a job. It was my identity, my purpose, everything I'd pushed aside to become James's perfectly polished wife. Yes, I said firmly. More than anything, Linda made a note. I know the superintendent at Cambridge Public Schools. The school year's already started, but they often need qualified teachers for mid-year replacements. I'll make a call. As I left Linda's office with a clear action plan, I felt a surge of confidence I hadn't experienced in years. I had support resources, and most importantly, I had myself again. That afternoon, I visited my old principal at Lakeside Elementary. Mr. Peterson's face lit up when I walked through his office door. Oilia Turner, ASI, live and breathe. Or wait, it's Alexander now, isn't it? It's Turner again, actually, I said, surprising myself. With how right that felt, or it will be soon. His expression softened with understanding. I'm sorry to hear that, but selfishly, I'm wondering if this means we might get our star teacher back someday. We chatted about the school, my former students, and the possibility of returning to teaching. Before I left, he introduced me to my replacement, a young woman named Danny, who immediately offered to let me visit the classroom. The kids would love to meet a former teacher, she said enthusiastically, especially since Mr. Peterson never stops talking about how amazing you were. Walking into my old classroom was like coming home. The smell of crayons and glue, the colorful bulletin boards, the small chairs where young minds developed it, all reminded me of who I was meant to be. That evening, Antonio from Lumiere called, "Mrs. Alexander, I hope I'm not overstepping, but I wanted to make sure you were okay after last night." His concern touched me. I'm doing surprisingly well, actually. And please call me Oilia. Then I spoke with our security team. The footage from last night has been marked for retention just in case you need it. Thank you, Antonio. That means more than you know. 3 days after leaving the house, I received a formal mail from James's attorney requesting a meeting. Linda advised caution, but agreed to accompany me. Let him make the first offer, she counseled. As we entered the conference room of an expensive downtown law firm, James sat across the polished table, flanked by an older attorney with steel gray hair. He looked terrible, unshaven dark circles under his eyes, his usual immaculate appearance noticeably diminished. When our eyes met, he attempted a smile that I did not return. "Oilia," he began softly, "I'm so sorry about what happened. I was drunk, stressed about the Callaway account. It didn't mean anything. Let's keep this professional." Linda interjected. "We're here to discuss terms." James's attorney, Martin Wheeler, cleared his throat. "My client is prepared to be generous. The prenuptial agreement is clear, but Mr. Alexander wishes to offer additional considerations to facilitate an amicable separation." The generous offer was insulting a year of support while I got back on my feet, provided I signed a confidentiality agreement, never to discuss the details of our marriage or separation. Linda smiled thinly. "I think you misunderstand the situation, Mr. Wheeler. We're not here to negotiate the prenup. We're here to discuss Mr. Wheeler, Alexander's misappropriation of my client's inheritance, his systematic financial control, amounting to economic abuse, and the significant career opportunities Miss Turner sacrificed for this marriage." James's face darkened. "That's ridiculous. I gave you everything, Oilia. A beautiful home, financial security. After you took away my independence, my career, and my self-respect, I finished for him maintaining eye contact. We have documentation of your financial control witness statements about your public humiliation tactics and evidence that you borrowed my grandfather's inheritance without permission." James turned to his attorney. "This is absurd." "She's twisting everything. We also," Linda continued calmly, Have security footage from Lumiere restaurant showing you calling your wife a disgrace in front of 20 business associates, abandoning her with a $5,000 bill on her, birthday and stating, and I quote, "A woman like you should be grateful I even looked your way." Excellent sound system they have there. The color drained from James's face. You wouldn't dare make this public. Think about my reputation, my business. We would prefer not to, I said, finding strength in truth. But I will not be silenced, intimidated, or cheated. I'm not asking for half your fortune. I'm asking for what's fair after 3 years of systematic erosion of my identity. The meeting concluded with James's attorney requesting time to confer with his client. As we left the conference room, James caught my arm. "You've changed," he said, his voice, a mixture of anger and bewilderment. I gently removed his hand. "No, James, I've remembered who I always was. You just never really saw me." 2 weeks later, we reached a settlement. James agreed to return my inheritance with interest, provide a fair financial settlement that acknowledged my contributions to their marriage, and transfer ownership of a small investment property in Cambridge that would provide rental income. In exchange, I agreed not to pursue more aggressive claims that might become public, though I refused any confidentiality clause that would prevent me from telling my own story. As I signed the final papers in Linda's office, I felt no triumph or vindication, only relief and a profound sense of closure. The woman who had walked into Lumiere restaurant on her birthday no longer existed. In her place stood someone stronger, wiser, and absolutely unwilling to compromise her worth ever again. 6 months after that fateful birthday dinner, I stood in front of my classroom at Cambridge Elementary School, watching 23 third graders file in for the morning. My classroom, the words, still gave me a thrill of ownership and purpose. The walls were covered with student artwork, reading progress charts, and inspirational quotes I'd carefully selected. "Good morning, Miss Turner," they chorused as they took their seats. "Good morning, amazing humans," I responded with a genuine smile. "Who's ready for Poetry Day?" The transition back to teaching hadn't been seamless. I'd started mid-year as a long-term substitute when a teacher went on maternity leave. The first weeks were exhausting as I readjusted to the rhythm of school days, lesson planning, and the constant energy required to engage young minds. But the exhaustion was cleansing, purposeful nothing, like the draining emptiness I'd felt in my final months with James. My small apartment was a 15-minute walk from the school, a second-floor unit in the Cambridge investment property that had been part of my divorce settlement. I'd rented out the other units, providing enough income to supplement my teaching salary comfortably. The space was entirely mine, decorated with colorful textiles, overflowing bookshelves, and plants that thrived under my attentive care. Sarah and Maya had become fixtures in my life again, our friendship stronger after what we'd been through. We had a standing Sunday brunch date where I gradually shared more details of my marriage and divorce, unburdening myself in the safety of their unconditional support. "I still can't believe you got him to give you that property," Maya said during one of these brunches. "Linda must be a miracle worker." "Not a miracle," I corrected. "Just the right leverage at the right time. James values his reputation above everything." The thought of clients knowing how he treated me, especially at Lumiere, was worth more to him than the property. Sarah studied me over her mimosa. "You know what I love most about having the old Oilia back? The way you stand up straight again. You literally shrink when you're not being true to yourself." Her observation struck me as profoundly accurate. I had physically diminished during my marriage, making myself smaller to accommodate James's oversized presence. Now I occupied space unapologetically, my voice clear and confident, whether addressing a classroom of children or audible of adults. At school, I found unexpected healing through my students, particularly through a girl named Emma. She transferred mid-year from a school where she'd been bullied for her thick glasses and quiet nature. During her first week, I overheard a classmate making fun of her appearance. "Emma," I'd said afterward, kneeling to meet her eyes, "do you know what I see when I look at you?" She shook her head, gaze fixed on the floor. "I see someone who notices details others miss. I see someone who thinks carefully before speaking. I see someone whose kindness will change lives someday." Over the following months, I watched Emma slowly unfold like a flower turning towards sunlight. She began raising her hand in class, sharing her thoughtful observations, even standing up for other children. Witnessing her transformation reminded me daily of the importance of seeing our own worth, even when others tried to diminish it. News about James reached me occasionally through mutual acquaintances. His firm had lost the Calloway account, apparently. Mr. Calloway had been deeply uncomfortable with James's behavior that night and had quietly transferred his business elsewhere. The ripple effect had damaged James's standing at the firm. I felt no satisfaction in this knowledge, only a quiet acknowledgement that actions have consequences. One Saturday morning in early autumn, I was grading papers at my favorite coffee shop when a familiar voice spoke. "Oilia, I thought that was you." I looked up to see Antonio, the manager from Lumiere, standing by my table with a surprised smile. "Antonio, what are you doing in Cambridge?" "I live a few blocks from here," he explained. "I only work in Boston. May I join you?" Over coffee, I learned that Antonio was pursuing a master's degree in hospitality management while working full-time. He asked thoughtful questions about my return to teaching, listening with genuine interest to my stories about the classroom. "I'm glad things worked out for you," he said sincerely. That night at the restaurant, I was worried. It was actually the best thing that could have happened. I admitted sometimes you need a dramatic wake-up call to see what's been happening slowly over time. Our coffee extended to lunch, and before parting we exchanged numbers. What began as occasional texts about neighborhood recommendations evolved into regular conversations about books, films, and eventually deeper topics like family dynamics and personal goals. Unlike James, Antonio never tried to impress me with status or possessions. He valued my thoughts, asked about my students, and shared his own vulnerabilities without hesitation. Our friendship developed organically, based on mutual respect rather than superficial attraction or social advantage. During this period of rebuilding, I also discovered an unexpected passion for writing. It began as therapeutic journaling, processing my experiences through private reflection. But as I wrote, I realized my story might help others in similar situations. I started a blog called Reclaiming Yourself, sharing anonymized versions of my experiences and the lessons I'd learned. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Women from across the country wrote to thank me for articulating what they'd been unable to name in their own relationships. "I didn't know financial control was a form of abuse until I read your post," one woman commented. "You've given me the courage to make changes," wrote another. The blog became a community, a safe space for people to share their stories and support one another. I carefully maintained my privacy, never using real names or specific details that could identify James or others involved. The goal wasn't revenge or exposure, but healing and education. Through teaching, writing, and rebuilding friendships, I gradually reconstructed my sense of self. The woman James had tried to mold me into the decorative, agreeable, status-appropriate wife faded like a poorly developed photograph, while the real Oilia emerged with greater clarity and definition. One evening, as Antonio and I walked along the Charles River after dinner at a local restaurant, he asked the question I'd been avoiding in my public writing. "Do you think you'll ever trust someone enough to marry again?" I considered his question carefully, watching the sunset paint the water with gold and crimson. "I don't know," he answered honestly, "but I do know I'll never again compromise who I am for someone else's vision of who I should be, and that feels like progress." He nodded, respecting my uncertainty without pushing for more. We continued walking in comfortable silence, two people enjoying each other's company without expectations or pretense. In that moment, I realized that regardless of what our relationship might become, I'd already succeeded in the most important relationship of all, the one with myself. 1 year to the day after James called me a disgrace and abandoned me with a $5,000 dinner bill, I stood alone on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sun rise over Cambridge. The morning air held the first hint of autumn crispness, promising change and new beginnings. A full year of healing. A year over discovering joy and small pleasures. Morning coffee without criticism, evenings spent however I pleased. Friendships nurtured without constraint. A year of rebuilding my career, watching my students grow and finding my voice as a writer and advocate. The journey from that humiliating night to this peaceful morning hadn't been linear. There were days when grief ambushed me, not for the loss of James, but for the years I'd spent diminishing myself, for the dreams I deferred for the person I might have become if I hadn't lost myself in someone else's expectations. There were nights when doubt crept in, whispering that perhaps I'd overreacted, that all marriages had difficult moments, that I should have tried harder. These thoughts came less from my heart than from the conditioning that taught women to blame themselves for relationship failures. But with each passing month, those days and nights grew fewer. The support of friends, the fulfillment of teaching the community that formed around my blog, all these helped me reconstruct a life that felt authentically mine. Sarah noticed the transformation first. "You laugh differently now," she observed over dinner one evening. "Louder, more freely, like you're not afraid of taking up too much space." Maya agreed. "And you dress for yourself now. Remember how you used to check every outfit with James? Now you wear what makes you happy." They were right. Every aspect of my life reflected my reclaimed autonomy. My classroom was organized according to my educational philosophy, not someone else's expectations. My home contained objects chosen for their meaning to me, not their impression on others. My conversations were genuine, unburdened by calculation or fear of judgment. My relationship with Antonio had evolved naturally into something neither of us had labeled, but both cherished. We enjoyed each other's company without pressure or pretense, building a connection based on mutual respect and appreciation of our differences rather than attempts to change or control each other. "You never asked me to be different," I told him once as we cooked dinner together in my kitchen. "Why would I?" he replied, genuinely puzzled. "I like who you are." Such a simple statement, yet so profound in its contrast to my marriage. My blog had grown to reach thousands of readers weekly. I maintained careful anonymity, never naming James or providing identifying details, focusing instead on the emotional dynamics of controlling relationships and the path to recovery. The community that formed around these writings became a source of strength, not just for me, but for countless others navigating similar challenges. On this anniversary morning, as I sipped my coffee and watched Cambridge come to life below my phone, chimed with an unexpected email. The sender's name was unfamiliar. Eleanor Richards. "Dear Oilia," it began. "You won't remember me, but I was at Lumiere the night your husband abandoned you. I was Mrs. Richards, the woman whose dress had wine spilled on it." My heart quickened as I continued reading. "I followed your blog for months without realizing who you were. It was only when you wrote about the anniversary of your awakening moment that the details clicked into place. I want you to know that night changed my life too. Watching your husband's cruelty and then seeing your dignity in response forced me to recognize similar patterns in my own marriage. 3 months ago, I finally found the courage to leave. Thank you for showing me what strength looks like. You weren't the disgrace that night. You were the inspiration. Tears blurred my vision as I finished the email. The thought that my worst moment had somehow helped someone else find her way to freedom was overwhelming. I hadn't planned it, couldn't have imagined it yet. Here was evidence that our darkest experiences can become beacons for others. This, I realized, was the deeper meaning in everything I'd endured. The lessons weren't just for me. They were meant to be shared. The first lesson was about self-worth. I'd entered my relationship with James believing love meant sacrifice, that compromise required abandoning parts of myself. I'd confused love with eraser, admiration with validation. Now I understood that genuine love expands rather than contracts, celebrates rather than critiques, supports rather than controls. The second lesson concerned inner strength. We often discover our deepest resources only when crisis forces our hand. That night at Lumiere, humiliated and abandoned, I'd found a well of courage I hadn't known I possessed. The woman who paid that $5,000 bill with trembling hands had initiated the process of reclaiming her life, her identity, her power. The third and perhaps most important lesson was about forgiveness, not of James, but of myself. For too long, I'd blamed myself for ignoring red flags, for tolerating mistreatment, for losing sight of my worth. Learning to release that self-judgment had been the most challenging aspect of recovery. Now I understood that compassion must begin with ourselves before it can extend outward. As the sun rose higher, painting my small balcony with golden light, I composed a reply to Eleanor Richards, thanking her for her courage in both leaving her marriage and reaching out to me. I invited her to join a support group I'd recently formed for women rebuilding their lives after controlling relationships. Later that day, I stood before my third-grade class, watching their eager faces as I introduced our new community service project. We would be creating care packages for a local women's shelter, each containing not just necessities, but personal notes of encouragement and affirmation. Words have power, I told my students. They can hurt, but they can also heal. Today we're going to write words that remind people they matter, that they are seen, that they are valued exactly as they are. As the children bent over their colorful cards, tongues poking out in concentration, I felt a profound sense of rightness. This was who I was meant to be. Not someone's accessory or project, but a teacher, a guide, a voice for those still finding their own. The journey from that birthday dinner to this classroom had been painful but necessary. Like a bone that breaks and heals stronger at the fracture point, I'd emerged more resilient, more authentic, more complete. Sometimes the most beautiful sunrise comes after the darkest night. The woman who paid that $5,000 bill with trembling hands isn't the same woman speaking to you today. She was the cocoon. And I am the butterfly. What parts of yourself are you ready to reclaim? If my story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button and share it with someone who might need to hear it. Leave a comment about a time you rediscovered your own strength. We heal better when we heal together. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, you are never too far gone to find your